I'm going to start by showing you how to sew binding on that does not fray. So this binding has been cut on the bias and it does not fray, the edges don't fray, it's a vinyl. And I cut it a little bit narrower than the normal binding. The normal binding is 2 inches wide, but this is 1 3/4 inches wide. Now I'm just going to be basting this on, so I don't have the full binding all the way around. You will start off by sewing it to the right side of your, well, okay. You've got the gusset side and the outside, so we're going to sew it to the outside. And if we were doing the front, this would be the front side. So the gusset, when we're sewing, is down. And I'm just basting this on because I'm going to be taking it off later and redoing it with the binding all the way around. But right now I'm just demonstrating. So you sew it on. Now this is easier with bias fabric. You can do it with fabric that's not on the bias, but it'll be harder to go around the curves. And it won't lay as nicely later on. These top corners are harder with it not on the bias. So bias, using fabric that is cut on the bias and stretches on the bias makes this a lot easier. Okay. Next, you'll take the fabric, wrap it around your edges, and of course I forgot to back stitch here, so it's coming off. There's a lot of different thicknesses that are going on in this purse. Sorry, I hope I have not been completely out of shot the whole time. And the reason I have this option of doing a non-fray binding that has a raw edge is because there's so many layers, and if you have a domestic machine, you've got to worry about these layers. In fact, we'll see how my machine does with this. It might struggle a little bit. So I'm going to sew from this top edge, and I'm going to edge stitch all the way around. And you will want to lengthen your stitch. Mine is currently at some really absurdly high number because I'm going to be taking these stitches out. But you'll still want to have a little longer than your normal stitch. And just be careful going over the thick areas. And on the curves. And you are almost done, but not quite yet. If you look at the back side, the gusset side, you'll see you have a lot of excess fabric here. Some places more than others. So you will just trim this all the way around with your scissors. making sure not to trim the gusset. And this will be what the finished edge looks like here. I think I cut it just a little fast, and so it's a little jagged. Oops. Damn. Here's another version that's less jagged. But this will be a raw edge, so you need to make sure your fabric works well to do that with. To sew the binding that does not fray, which has no raw edges, you will use the binding that is 2 inches wide. And instead of sewing it to the outside first, like the non-fray version, you're going to sew it with the gusset side facing out. So I'm using a very long stitch because I'm just basting this and we'll be taking it off so I can finish the whole purse in one method. But when you do it, you will not baste it. You will just stitch it on. Be careful at the thick parts. Okay. So often when you are making binding, you will fold it towards the raw edge and then fold it over, and we'll stitch from this side and just hope we catch the back. But we're doing it a little bit backwards, and yes, you are going to still fold it towards the raw edge and fold it over. But you see how we're not catching these stitches here because this place is thick, whereas over here, if I fold it towards the edge and then fold it over, I do cover that stitch because there's a variety of thicknesses. So the reason I like to do it a little bit backwards is because I can fold it just however much or little I need. Say I only have this much that I can cover it with, well then that's as much as I fold it because of how thick it is. And then if I have more that I can fold it, then I fold it more. So the purpose is to just make sure you've just covered this line of stitching that you just made. And this is enough layers that my machine might not be able to sew through it. So if my machine doesn't sew through this, then I will not be able to completely demonstrate it to you, but I can show you the other ones that I have made that were thinner fabrics. And if you do have a industrial, or if you're using fabric that is not too thick for a domestic, even if it is vinyl, you can use this method like I'm using now. You don't have to do the non-fray method for every vinyl. That's just a way to cut down on the layers. And the way we're sewing this, hopefully if my machine can handle it, you will have your stitching visible on the other side, and it might not be perfectly even. I mean, you can try your very best to make it even and it'll look pretty good on the back, but it might waver just a little bit. So if you like, you might want to change your stitching on the bottom to something that will blend in here. However, then you would need to change it over here. So just try to stitch as evenly as possible here so that your stitching on the back will look straight. Okay, I'm going to edge stitch from the front, or from the outside of the purse. I have a feeling I'll be able to sew through all these layers on the flap, but I might not be able to when I get to the thicker layers over here. I'm just pushing my machine to its, to the edge of its capabilities right now. Got to hand feed it a bit. Okay, thankfully I was able to stitch that. And the front looks nice. You can see the stitches are a little bit visible on the back, but fairly straight. So you won't have to worry if you stitch, if you bind like this, you won't have to worry about not catching the back side of your binding and then having to re-sew it. So these are the two methods. Fully enclosed, raw edge. And they look essentially the same from the front. The only difference is on the bindings. Or sorry, not the bindings. The gusset. The only difference is on the gusset.